So 5 days ago, I ran the Osaka Marathon out in Japan for a new PB of 2:28.19, some 10 seconds faster than my previous personal best. It was an incredible opportunity. Thanks to the guys at Mizuno for sending me out. And I raced in the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro. In today's video, I'm just going to do a bit of a race recap, go through how I was feeling throughout the race, talk a little bit about my pacing strategy, my fueling, as well as do a review of the Wave Rebellion Pro, having used it for the last sort of 3-4 months in my training, as well as racing it on race day out in Osaka. Now, racing a marathon in Japan was an incredible experience and one I'd do definitely again in a heartbeat, but it wasn't made easy by the 24 hours of travel to get out there, 9-hour difference, so I was pretty jet lagged. Come to the day of the marathon, I think I only slept about 3 hours before, but yeah, so maybe not the most ideal preparation in the days before, but in terms of the actual race, it went really well, and I was really chuffed to come away with a PB. So first of all, let's talk about the Wave Rebellion Pro. I'm going to do a little bit of a review, as I said, having used this shoe for majority of my training. This is the pair I actually wore for the race. Mizuno were kind enough to give me a new pair, having done about 200-300 miles in my original pair. It was nice to have a fresh pair for race day. This shoe is a pretty unique design in terms of its geometry. This has been designed by Mizuno to have this, what they're calling smooth speed assist. It basically transitions you quickly up onto your mid to forefoot to promote a more efficient running style. This is Mizuno's first super shoe to hit the market. Admittedly, by them, they're a little bit late in the game, but they've been developing this one over the sort of last 3, 4, maybe even 5 years out in Japan. So the main question I've been asked over the last few months is, how does it compare to other super shoes on the market? And for me, the proof is in the pudding in terms of my PB. I ran a 10-second PB in this shoe, basically the same time I ran in the Nike Alpha Fly. So for me personally, my foot strike, my running efficiency, it is just as good as the other super shoes out on the market, which is great. This is Mizuno's first super shoe, so to enter the market with a competitive racing shoe is really good, and it comes to the market at £200, which for a carbon fibre racing shoe is actually pretty reasonable, considering the likes of Nike and Adidas are now charging almost close to the £300 mark. So yeah, price point was pretty good, and the overall ride of this shoe I've really learnt to enjoy. While I was out in Japan, I got to visit the Mizuno R&D lab, research and development, where the shoes like this are made in their prototype form and then tested on the track. And this Wave Rebellion Pro has actually been found to improve the efficiency of running and actually improve your lactate threshold. So basically you can run at a faster speed for a longer period of time when running in the Wave Rebellion Pro compared to their sort of more daily trainer style shoe. So it just shows this shoe provides really good energy return, improves efficiency of running. So for the marathon distance, this shoe really stands out. But I would also advise this for people looking at maybe doing a 10K race as well. So as with all shoe reviews here on the channel, I thought I would do some likes and dislikes of this shoe from Mizuno. So my main like is the geometry of this shoe. You have to run fast in it. It gets you up onto your toes and just encourages you to run forward at a fairly rapid pace, which is great. It's just what you want for a racing shoe. Another really good point about this shoe is it actually lessens the load that goes through your calf. Due to that geometry, it gets you up into your toes, so that supposedly lessens the impact on your calves. And I actually noticed that in the race itself. I usually suffer from a bit of like fatigue in my lower legs, in the calf muscles towards the end of the marathon, but I didn't have that at all in Osaka. So the shoe definitely works at pushing you forward, and the geometry of the shoe lessens the load on the calf. So maybe if you're somebody who gets tired calves towards the end of the race, this could be a good option for you as well. Another really good plus point to this shoe is it really stands out. This colorway is pretty unique. I don't think there's any other shoes on the market that have this sort of snazzy colorway. I know it's only an aesthetic thing, but when it comes to racing and performing at your best, you want to also look good. So I really like the design of this one. Really stands out there. And my only other final likes of this shoe is how lightweight it is. Lightweight but also comfortable. With a racing shoe, you want it to be super light, so when you're running a marathon, you've got as little weight on your foot as possible, but it also is a really comfortable shoe for that 42 kilometers. It's been stripped back enough so that it's fast, but they haven't taken away all sort of comfort elements. For example, the heel counter has a nice amount of padding. A lockdown across the top of the foot was really good in this shoe as well. So in terms of sizing and fit, I went true to size, and I would advise doing that if you're looking to pick this shoe up. So moving on to some of my dislikes, the main thing for me is the versatility of this one. Anything faster than sort of 3:30 per kilometre, it feels incredible, but at sort of easy paces, it feels a little bit unnatural. This shoe has been designed purely for speed, and when I was speaking to the Japanese designers about products in Japan, a lot of them are designed for a specific purpose, and the idea of this one is to make you run fast over a long distance. So that kind of makes sense that it doesn't feel so great at easy paces, but it just means it's not quite as versatile as maybe some of the other options out there in the carbon racing shoe scene. Also, because of the geometry of this shoe, it only really suits people that are going to be landing on their mid to forefoot. If you're somebody who lands on your heel, so a heel striker, then I expect you're probably not going to get on very well with this shoe. Because of the way it's been designed. So that's something to note. If you're a midfoot or forefoot striker, and you know that from maybe getting your gait analysed, then this is a shoe that's going to really help you across a marathon distance, and maybe one you want to give a try. Maybe when you're looking to purchase your next racing shoe. And the final thing that is not necessarily a dislike for me, but it maybe makes it not so suitable for other runners, is the Japanese marketing team are saying that this is a shoe designed for elite runners. So somebody in their definition that can run a marathon in under 2.5 hours. So that equates to around that 3:30 per kilometre pace. So if you're somebody who is maybe looking to run a marathon at sort of more the 4-5 hour distance, this probably isn't a shoe for you. And in fact, I think Mizuno have other shoes that are tailored for that sort of bracket in terms of the marathon racing shoes, whereas this one is designed for fast running, for faster runners, which again make it not so versatile for sort of the mass population. But if you're somebody who's looking to absolutely smash out a 5 and 10k at around that 3:30 pace or faster, then this shoe probably will work really well for you. But if you're somebody who's aiming for more like 5-6 minutes a kilometre, then I would expect maybe you won't get on as well with this shoe. I'm not saying you can't run in it, but it's not who it's been designed for, if that makes sense. So moving on to the race recap. The race itself out in Osaka, incredible experience. The race started at 9 o'clock, which actually was a pretty good time for a marathon start. Sometimes they're really early, and sometimes I've struggled to sort of get my body awake in time for the start of a race. So the time was pretty good. The weather conditions on the day were around 4 or 5 degrees, so maybe a little bit on the colder side, and there was a slight wind from the north, maybe only about 10 miles an hour at its maximum. So the majority of the course was pretty sheltered. There were a few long straights that was a little bit windy, but in terms of conditions, I think they were pretty close to perfect on the day. So I started the race in the A pen. There was pens from A all the way down to, I believe, A, B, C, D, E, F. So I was in the pen just before the elites. And in hindsight, I wish I had sort of pushed my way to the front of that A pen a little bit more than I did when I crossed the start line. So from your pen, you run up to the start line. When I crossed the start line, I was in about 580th position. And when I finished the marathon, I was in 134th. So over that first sort of 2 or 3 kilometres of the race, I really had to sort of weave in and out of runners that weren't going quite as quick as me, that started in the same block. So maybe that was an error on my behalf. I should have made sure I was a bit closer to the front, because I got stuck behind a few runners. But once I was through the sort of majority of the crowds, the roads were really wide and opened up. After about 8 kilometres, I caught up with a group which were ticking along nicely at around 3:26 per kilometre, which is exactly the sort of pace I wanted to run for the marathon. So I just settled in, found my pack, and there was actually a pacemaker on the front of the pack that I was running in. It turns out that the 2 lead Japanese female runners were in my group, and they were being paced to the 30k mark by a male pacer who was literally ticking off 3:26 per kilometre like clockwork. So it was an ideal group to be in. My group was quite small in terms of the height, so when it came to the sort of windier sections on the course, there wasn't any shelter behind the runners in front of me, because I was actually one of the taller runners in the group, which is sometimes unusual. But I was a good sort of like head height above these female Japanese runners that were in my group. But other than that, it was a perfect group. We were ticking along nicely, and I basically ended up running with them all the way to around 35 kilometers. So after about 40 minutes, I took my first gel, and this is something I've been practicing in my training. Definitely something I would advise. Stick to your fueling plan. 40 minutes in, took my first gel, no issues at all. One thing I've learned about taking on fueling in a marathon is there's no rush. The race is a long period of time, so if it takes you 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers to take one gel, that's absolutely fine, and it's much better than sort of rushing it and then getting your breathing off as a result. So yeah, a top tip that I've learned over the sort of last 2 or 3 marathons that I've run is don't rush your fueling, and I took that into this race, and I think it really helps in terms of just staying in control of your breathing, your heart rate, your stomach doesn't get overloaded with one massive influx of carbohydrate. So my group ended up going through the halfway point in 73 minutes 40 seconds, which is to the slower end of what I had wanted going into the race. I think I was aiming for between 72.05 and 73.40, so we were pretty much bang on in terms of pacing. If I'd have carried on at that pace, I would have ran a 2:27.20, and I ended up running 2:28.19. So I only slowed down a little bit in the second half of the race, having gone through in around that 73.5 minute mark, and that was a pretty good pace to go through. I was feeling comfortable. I ran a lot of the race to heart rate and to feel, so I wore an arm-based heart rate monitor, which I've been using in my training, and I knew that my heart rate for my sort of long runs and my longer efforts is around 168 to 170. If I go above 171, then that is above my threshold heart rate, so that's when I will sometimes come into issues such as cramping or basically just overcooking it a little bit. So I wanted to stay in that sort of bracket of what marathon pace felt like, rather than just sticking religiously to a pace. And that's something I revised after the Valencia marathon, where I was trying to hit 320 per kilometer every kilometer, and basically I wasn't listening to the warning signs that I had early on in that race, which as a result meant it was too fast. So I was conscious just to play it a little bit more by ear and by feel, and yeah, around 326 per kilometer was what I sort of was ticking off the Ks in the early half of the race, as a result of that strategy. The half marathon point was probably where I made my first mistake as well, in terms of how the race went and what I would do differently next time. So when I went through the half marathon, my watch actually said I'd ran 21.5 kilometers, so about 400 meters longer than I'd actually run. So my watch was basically a little bit ahead of time in terms of the distance, which meant it was saying I was running a little bit faster than what I actually was. So when it came to the later stages of the race, it turns out I had a little bit further to run than I thought I did. So I think on my watch it said I ran 42.75 in terms of the overall distance, which for a marathon it's only 42.2. So that 500 meters extra towards the end meant that I thought I was basically going to hit 2:27, and it turns out I only ran 2:28.19, and I had to really kick it down in those last sort of 500 meters in order to get under my previous PB. So in hindsight, I wish I'd manually lapped my watch. So my watch beeped every 5 kilometers, which was a great strategy, something I'll definitely use again next time. Just allows you to sort of settle into the group, enjoy the experience a little bit more, rather than just constantly looking at your watch. But I think next time I'll manually lap it at 5 kilometers and 10 kilometers and 15 kilometers, just so I know that the pacing is accurate, and try not to rely on GPS, especially if you're doing a big city marathon where things like skyscrapers can really interfere with that, and there's a few tunnels on course as well. So yeah, in hindsight, that's definitely something I would change. So after 24 kilometers, I'm still feeling really good, and that is when I took my second gel. After about an hour and 20 minutes of running. Again, that was in my plan. No issues whatsoever with that gel. Went down nicely, no gut issues, and I was still feeling really comfortable at this point. Heart rate was in exactly the right zone, around 170 beats at this point, and I can remember thinking, all right, just stay patient. The marathon is a long way, and it gets tough after sort of 32 kilometers. So I was just conscious in my mind just to keep patient. If I'm still feeling really good at sort of 32, 35 kilometers, that's when I can start picking up the pace a little bit. But until then, just settle into the group, let everyone else do the work, and just soak up some of the scenery and the experience. And that was, it was a real good point in the race, the sort of between the 24 and 32k mark. I just completely settled in. There are a few sort of hills to navigate, one of which was around 500 meters in distance, around 5 to 6% gradient, and that was probably the the first time on the course where I felt the pace that we were running at, in terms of it felt difficult getting up the hill. I looked back at the heart rate data on my watch, and at that point it peaked at around 175. On the downhill, it came back down into the low 160s actually. So it was just a short period of time that I was pushing into that red zone category, but I'm glad I kept it under control. I didn't rush up the hill. In fact, I think the group that I was running with maybe got 2 or 3 meters ahead of me on the uphill. And then on the downhill, my sort of longer stride allowed me to catch up. I actually found myself off the front of the group on the downhill. So it just goes to show different runners are suited to different terrain. I personally find running downhill a lot easier than going uphill. Don't know if that's down to my foot strike, my gait, or whatever. But yeah, that was probably the first point on the course after around 32 kilometers where it got a little bit tough on that uphill section. So after 36 kilometers, things are really starting to get tough at this point in the race. My legs are starting to feel a little bit heavy, especially in my quads, and my sort of obliques on the side of my abdominals are starting to fatigue a little bit. I think as I get more tired throughout a race, my form naturally is more side to side, and that's something I've worked on over the last few years. I've got to try and make sure my arm drive is much more forward or linear. But yeah, 36 kilometers, this is when it got really tough, and it was the last gel I took. So I actually only took 3 gels throughout the course of the race. One before, 2 chews in the lead up. So I think I had 60 grams of carbs in chews, 30 grams of carbs on the start line, and then 30, 60, 90 grams of carbs again throughout the race. But when I took my 3rd gel, I made a bit of a mistake when it came to taking on that gel. Maybe I rushed it a little bit, and there was a slight incline when I took the gel. So I had to sort of bend down, get the gel out of my pocket, which was located on the top of my thigh. And as I bent down, I felt my first sort of cramping sensation in the obliques. And taking on a gel on an uphill section is not advised, and something I wouldn't do. And I know that. It was only a slight incline, and then it went downhill again. So I sort of was preparing to take the gel on the downhill section, but I actually reached for the gel on the uphill section. So when my body was in a bit more stress than it would be, say, running on the flats. And yeah, that's when I had my first sort of signs of cramping. So at the 37 kilometer point, that is when I actually lost contact with the few remaining people that were in my group. It started off at around 15 runners at the 10k point. At around 30k, we were reduced to maybe 5 or 6 runners. And then at 37 kilometers, I think 3 of the remaining runners that I was running with got away from me. So I slowed down a little bit towards the end of the race. I think my 5k splits were around 17:10 to 17:30, so exactly where I wanted them to be. And then that last sort of 5k was around 18:30. So I think I lost about a minute of time across the last section of the race, just because my body was fatiguing, a little bit of cramping, nothing like I experienced in Valencia, thankfully. So just goes to show practicing my fueling strategy really helped and worked when it came to the Osaka Marathon. But yeah, the last sort of 5 kilometers of the race was one straight line, and by this point I was on my own solo, and it was a real sort of mental battle to try and get to that finish line as quick as possible. Everything is sort of screaming at you. My quads were really heavy, especially my right quad. I can remember feeling a little bit of sort of numbness almost in it, but I was just determined to get to that line as quickly as possible. I thought the finish line was coming a little bit quicker than it did. It was quite twisty and turny actually at the end of the finish line, so you couldn't actually see the finish sort of until you're about maybe 500 meters away from it. And that's when I saw the clock and was like, right, I've got 500 meters to absolutely empty the tank. So I've just absolutely went for it, not knowing if I could get under my PB of 2:28:30, and I ended up running 2:28:19. So yeah, 10-second PB. I was really chuffed, but I was completely exhausted by the end, absolutely knackered, having tried to sort of sprint to race the clock for the end there. But I'm so glad I did, and came away with a 10-second PB, and overall a really good experience. In terms of the 3 marathons I've done so far, that was probably the most comfortable I felt throughout the whole race. So I think it only got really difficult at around 37 kilometers, whereas for my first marathon, after about 32 kilometers, it was really tough. And the second one in Valencia, if you watch the video from that, I struggled from about 15 kilometers. So to get to that far into the race gives me really good confidence moving forward that I can take some more time off my PB. My next race is going to be the Boston Marathon in the 17th of April, which is in around 6.5 weeks time. And I'm hoping to sort of like carry on my training. I've taken about 5 days to a week off, and then I'm going to slowly build it back and hopefully build on from what I ran in Osaka and run a little bit faster in Boston Marathon. Hopefully a little bit closer to that 2:25 pace. That's the plan anyway. I hope you've enjoyed the videos that I've brought out from this series. Some exciting stuff coming up on the channel. I'm actually flying to Kenya tomorrow for a 2-week training camp. I'll take the first week really easy, having come back from the marathon, but just being in a 10 at altitude. Hopefully we'll see some training benefits as well, just from being at altitude, sleeping at altitude. So yeah, really looking forward to that experience, and I'm going to be there for 2 weeks. There's going to be a lot more running content coming to the channel, so if you're completely new, please consider subscribing and sticking around. But yeah, that's it from Japan. I certainly would advise adding a Japanese marathon to your bucket list. And the Mizuno shoes handled the 42 kilometers really well, and yeah, it's really interesting to see that there's now another sort of super shoe in the category that people can now choose between. So yeah, let me know if you try the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro. I'd love to hear how you get on well with it. But until next time, aspire to run, run to inspire, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye.